What if you bought a haunted mansion for $500,000 only to discover the ghosts were fake but real spirits were watching? I should have known something was wrong when the door handle turned ice cold under my palm that first night in September, but I was so desperate to believe I had found the perfect haunted property that I ignored every red flag waving in front of my face. My name is Laura Sanchez, and I have spent the last 10 years building a reputation as one of the most respected paranormal investigators on the East Coast. When my grandmother passed away last spring and left me her entire life savings of $150,000, I knew exactly what I wanted to do with it. I was going to buy a genuinely haunted historic property and turn it into the most authentic Halloween attraction anyone had ever experienced. The Blackwood Manor had been on the market for 3 years when I first saw the listing. Built in 1892 by railroad magnate Edmund Blackwood, the Victorian mansion sat on 12 acres of overgrown grounds in the Hudson Valley, just 2 hours north of New York City. The property description mentioned unexplained phenomena, cold spots, and the tragic history of 3 family deaths within its walls. Robert Mackenzie, the listing agent, seemed almost too eager when I called about viewing the property. He was a tall man in his 50s with silver hair and an expensive suit who spoke with the kind of smooth confidence that should have made me more cautious. "Miss Sanchez, I have to be honest with you," he said as we walked up the front steps of the mansion on that humid August afternoon. "Most buyers run away screaming after spending just one night here. But given your background in paranormal investigation, I think you might appreciate what this place has to offer." The moment I stepped inside, I felt it. The air was thick with an oppressive energy that made the hair on my arms stand up. The grand staircase creaked ominously, and I could swear I heard footsteps on the floor above us, even though we were supposedly alone. The previous owner was Edmund Blackwood's great-nephew, Robert explained as we toured the dusty rooms. He inherited the place but could never bring himself to live here after what happened to his family. His grandson Trevor actually helps me maintain the property. As if summoned by his mention, a young man in his 20s appeared from what looked like a service corridor. Trevor Mackenzie had the same sharp features as his grandfather Robert, but where Robert exuded polished charm, Trevor seemed nervous and jumpy. "Just checking the electrical systems," Trevor mumbled, avoiding eye contact. "Some of the wiring is pretty old." That first walkthrough was incredible. Doors slammed shut behind us, the temperature dropped 20 degrees in certain rooms, and I witnessed what appeared to be a full-body apparition of a woman in Victorian dress lighting across the second-floor hallway. By the time we finished the tour, I was completely sold. "I need to be upfront about the asking price," Robert said as we stood in the grand foyer. $500,000 might seem steep for a property in this condition, but you are not just buying a house. You are buying a piece of paranormal history. I did not hesitate. I put down $50,000 as earnest money that very day and arranged for a mortgage to cover the remaining $450,000. The closing was scheduled for early September, giving me just enough time to renovate and prepare for Halloween opening. The next 6 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. I hired contractors to handle essential repairs while preserving the mansion's historic character. I designed tour routes that would showcase the most active paranormal areas. I created marketing materials emphasizing the authentic supernatural experiences visitors could expect. The paranormal activity during this time was incredible. Almost every night brought new phenomena. Doors would swing open and slam shut, disembodied voices echoed through empty rooms, and cold spots appeared and disappeared without warning. I documented everything with cameras and audio equipment, building what I thought would be compelling evidence to market the attraction. My excitement grew with each passing day. I had found something truly special, a genuinely haunted property that would set my Halloween attraction apart from every cheesy haunted house with actors in rubber masks. The first sign of trouble came 3 weeks before our scheduled October 1st opening. I was reviewing the audio recordings from the previous night when I noticed something odd. A voice that I had attributed to supernatural activity sounded suspiciously like Trevor Mackenzie. I replayed the recording several times, comparing it to conversations I had had with Trevor during the renovation period. The more I listened, the more convinced I became that it was him. But that seemed impossible. The recording was made at 2 in the morning, and I had been alone in the house. I decided to investigate further. That weekend, I set up motion-activated cameras in areas where I had not previously placed surveillance equipment. What I captured changed everything. The footage showed Trevor entering the house through a basement window at 1:30 in the morning. He was carrying what appeared to be a small speaker and some kind of electronic device. I watched in growing horror as he positioned the equipment behind a loose baseboard in the dining room. For the next hour, the cameras recorded Trevor creating what I had believed to be genuine paranormal activity. He used hidden speakers to project voices, operated some kind of remote-controlled mechanism to open and close doors, and even used a small projector to create the apparition sightings I had been documenting. I felt physically sick watching that footage. Everything I had experienced, everything I had based my investment on, was completely fake. The next morning, I confronted Robert McKenzie at his office. I brought printed screenshots from the security footage and played the audio recordings on my laptop. "I want to know exactly what is going on here," I said, placing the evidence on his desk. "Your grandson has been staging paranormal activity in the house I bought." Robert barely glanced at the materials before leaning back in his chair with a smile that made my blood run cold. "Laura, I think you misunderstood our arrangement," he said calmly. "You bought the property as is, with full knowledge of its reputation for supernatural activity. What Trevor does in his spare time is not really relevant to our transaction." "You defrauded me," I said, my voice rising. "You artificially inflated the value of that property by staging fake paranormal activity." "That is a very serious accusation," Robert replied, his tone shifting to something more threatening. "I hope you have considered the legal implications of making such claims without solid proof." I stared at him in disbelief. "I have video footage of your grandson creating fake ghost activity in the house." "Do you?" Robert asked, opening his laptop. "Because according to my security system, Trevor was helping his mother move furniture that night. I have timestamped footage from her apartment complex showing him there until almost 4 in the morning." He turned his screen toward me, showing grainy surveillance footage of Trevor carrying boxes into an apartment building. The timestamp showed the same night I had recorded him in my house. I knew the footage I had was real, but Robert had clearly been planning for this possibility. He had created an alibi for Trevor that would be very difficult to challenge. "I think you should be very careful about spreading rumors that could damage our reputation," Robert continued. "We have been in business in this community for over 20 years. If you start making false accusations, we might have to consider legal action to protect ourselves." I left his office feeling defeated and trapped. I had sunk everything into this property, taken out a massive mortgage, and already sold $30,000 worth of advance tickets for opening night. Even if I could prove the fraud, I did not have the money or time for a lengthy legal battle. That night, I sat alone in the mansion trying to figure out what to do next. The house felt different somehow, colder and more oppressive than it had during the previous weeks. As I reviewed my options, I heard something that made me freeze. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps moving across the floor above me. But this was not the light creaking I had grown accustomed to during Trevor's fake performances. These sounded like boots, thick-soled and purposeful. I grabbed my digital recorder and headed for the stairs. The second-floor hallway was empty, but the footsteps continued, moving toward the master bedroom at the end of the hall. As I followed the sound, the temperature dropped so dramatically that I could see my breath. Then I heard the voice. "Get out." It was not Trevor's voice or any voice I had heard before. This was deeper, older, filled with a rage that made my bones ache. "Get out of my house." The words came from directly behind me. I spun around to find the hallway filled with the transparent figure of a man in Victorian-era clothing. Unlike Trevor's projected apparitions, this figure was three-dimensional, casting shadows and displacing the air around him. "You are not welcome here," the spirit said, his eyes fixed on mine with unmistakable hostility. "Remove the lies. Remove the mockery. Restore the honor of this house." I stood frozen as the spirit moved toward me, his form becoming more solid with each step. "The boy and his grandfather have disturbed our rest with their deception," he continued. "We will not tolerate their presence or their lies any longer." The spirit reached out as if to touch my face, and I felt a coldness unlike anything I had ever experienced. Then he was gone, leaving me alone in the hallway with the absolute certainty that I had just encountered something genuinely supernatural. Over the next 3 days, the real paranormal activity escalated dramatically. Objects moved across rooms without any mechanical assistance. Voices spoke in languages I did not recognize. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with an angry energy. Most importantly, I began to see other spirits. A woman in a wedding dress who appeared in mirrors, a child who played in the nursery, and an elderly man who sat by the fireplace in the library. These were not the flashy, dramatic manifestations Trevor had been creating. These were subtle, authentic, and undeniably real. I realized that the Blackwood Manor was genuinely haunted, but the resident spirits were furious about the fake activity that had been contaminating their home. They wanted the deception to end, and they were escalating their own manifestations to make their displeasure known. This gave me an idea. I spent the next week documenting everything. I set up cameras in locations Trevor could not access, recorded audio at times when he was provably elsewhere, and used specialized equipment to measure electromagnetic fields and temperature variations that could not be artificially created. The evidence I collected was overwhelming. The real spirits were not only active, they were cooperative. They seemed to understand that I was trying to expose the fraud and restore authenticity to their home. Armed with this new documentation, I scheduled a meeting with Robert Mackenzie for the following Friday. But this time, I brought backup. Detective Maria Castellanos from the County Fraud Division had been investigating complaints about suspicious real estate practices in the area. When I presented her with my evidence, she was very interested in pursuing charges. Real estate fraud is a serious crime, she explained as we sat in Robert's office waiting for him to arrive. If we can prove that he knowingly misrepresented the property's value through staged paranormal activity, he could face significant fines and possible jail time. Robert arrived with his lawyer, a thin man in an expensive suit who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. "Miss Sanchez, Detective Castellanos," Robert said, settling into his chair. "I understand you have some concerns about the Blackwood property. We have evidence that you and your grandson defrauded Miss Sanchez by staging fake paranormal activity to inflate the property value," Detective Castellanos replied, placing a thick folder on the desk. Robert's lawyer leaned forward. "My client categorically denies these allegations." "Then perhaps your client can explain how his grandson's voice appears on audio recordings made inside the locked house at times when he claims to have been elsewhere," I said, playing several of the clearest recordings. The lawyer looked uncomfortable, but Robert maintained his composure. "Audio recordings can be easily manipulated," he said. "This proves nothing." Detective Castellanos opened her folder and pulled out several documents. "Actually, it proves quite a bit," she said. "We have been investigating your business practices for the past 6 months. 3 other clients have filed complaints about properties that were allegedly haunted but turned out to have staged supernatural activity." Robert's face went pale. "We also have financial records showing payments to local actors for services described as paranormal consultation," she continued. "And we found the equipment your grandson was using hidden in the basement of the Blackwood Manor." The lawyer whispered something to Robert, who nodded grimly. "My client would like to discuss a settlement," the lawyer said. Over the next hour, we negotiated the terms of Robert's admission of guilt. He would pay triple damages under the state's consumer fraud statutes, cover all my legal expenses, and face criminal charges for wire fraud and conspiracy. But the most satisfying part came when Detective Castellanos asked about the other properties. "We need the names and addresses of every property where you staged paranormal activity," she said. "And we need a complete list of everyone involved in the conspiracy." Robert's shoulders sagged as he realized the full scope of his legal exposure. "There were 7 properties over the past 4 years," he admitted. "We made almost $2 million in fraudulent commissions." The criminal charges resulted in Robert serving 18 months in prison and Trevor receiving 2 years of probation and community service. The civil settlement gave me enough money to pay off the mortgage and fund extensive renovations. But the real victory came from what I discovered about the authentic supernatural activity. Working with the genuine spirits of Blackwood Manor, I created something far more compelling than Trevor's crude special effects could ever have achieved. The real paranormal activity was subtle, intelligent, and deeply moving. The woman in the wedding dress was Edmund Blackwood's daughter Margaret, who had died of pneumonia just 3 days before her wedding. The child was her younger brother William, who had drowned in the estate's pond at age 7. The elderly man by the fireplace was Edmund himself, still watching over his children more than a century after his death. These spirits were not angry or malevolent. They were simply protective of their home and offended by the crude mockery of their existence. Once the fake activity stopped, they began interacting with visitors in ways that were genuinely educational and moving. The authentic Blackwood Manor opened on Halloween night to a sold-out crowd. Instead of jump scares and rubber monsters, visitors experienced real paranormal phenomena guided by the spirits themselves. Margaret would appear in mirrors to show visitors her wedding dress, still preserved in the master bedroom wardrobe. William could be heard playing with toys in the nursery, and sometimes visitors caught glimpses of him peeking around corners with shy curiosity. Edmund would move his favorite books in the library and adjust the fireplace tools to let people know he was present. The attraction became a sensation, but not in the way I had originally planned. Word spread through paranormal investigation communities about the authentic supernatural experiences available at Blackwood Manor. Instead of thrill seekers looking for manufactured scares, I began attracting serious researchers, historians, and people genuinely interested in communicating with spirits. The revenue from the authentic attraction far exceeded what I had projected from the fake haunted house. More importantly, I had restored dignity to the Blackwood family and created something that honored their memory rather than exploiting it. 6 months after opening, I received a letter that made everything worthwhile. It was from Margaret Blackwood Thompson, the great-great-niece of Edmund Blackwood, living in California. She had heard about the attraction through a paranormal research group and wanted to thank me for treating her family's spirits with respect. For years, we knew something was wrong with the old house, she wrote. Family members who visited reported feeling unwelcome and sensing anger from our ancestors. But since you opened the attraction, several relatives have visited and reported peaceful, even joyful interactions with Uncle Edmund, Aunt Margaret, and little William. Thank you for giving them back their dignity. That letter is framed in my office, along with the settlement check from Robert Mackenzie's insurance company and a photograph of the 3 spirits standing together on the manor's front porch. The photograph was taken by a visitor using an old film camera, and it remains one of the clearest spirit photographs ever captured. The Blackwood Manor Ghost Experience now operates year-round, not just during Halloween season. We host paranormal investigation weekends, historical education programs, and private seances for families trying to connect with their own deceased relatives. Trevor Mackenzie eventually contacted me to apologize for his role in the fraud. He had been struggling financially and felt pressured by his grandfather to participate in the scheme. After completing his community service, he enrolled in a paranormal investigation program and now works as a legitimate researcher. I learned something important during those months of creating fake paranormal activity, he told me during our conversation. Real spirits are nothing like what I was pretending to create. They are people, with personalities and feelings and stories. They deserve respect, not exploitation. Robert Mackenzie was less repentant. During his sentencing hearing, he blamed his victims for being gullible and insisted that he had simply been giving people what they wanted to believe. The judge was not impressed. Mr. Mackenzie, you violated the trust of people who came to you for professional real estate services, she said before imposing the maximum sentence. You exploited their hopes and dreams to enrich yourself through deliberate deception. The court finds your lack of remorse particularly troubling. Today, 3 years after that terrible confrontation in Robert's office, I can honestly say that being defrauded was one of the best things that ever happened to me. It forced me to look beyond surface appearances and discover something far more valuable than what I thought I was buying. The Blackwood Manor spirits have become my partners in creating an experience that educates people about authentic paranormal phenomena while honoring the memory of those who have passed on. We have helped dozens of families connect with their own deceased relatives, provided valuable research data to paranormal investigators, and created a sustainable business that supports historic preservation. Most importantly, I learned that truth is always more compelling than deception, even when the truth is harder to believe than the lies. The real Edmund Blackwood was a fascinating man who built his railroad fortune through innovative engineering and fair treatment of his workers. Margaret was an accomplished artist whose paintings still hang in the manor's gallery. William was a bright child who loved astronomy and kept detailed journals about his observations of the night sky. These were not the generic scary ghosts that Robert and Trevor had been trying to sell. These were complex, interesting people whose stories deserved to be told accurately and with respect. Every night when I lock up the manor and say goodnight to Edmund, Margaret, and William, I am reminded of the difference between exploiting people's hopes and honoring them. The spirits respond with warmth and gratitude, sometimes moving objects or adjusting lights to let me know they appreciate being treated as individuals rather than props in a carnival show. The financial success of the authentic attraction has allowed me to establish the Blackwood Foundation for Paranormal Research, which provides grants to legitimate investigators and helps families dealing with unexplained phenomena in their homes. We have also purchased 2 other historically significant properties where preliminary investigations have revealed genuine spiritual activity. Each new property brings its own challenges and opportunities. The spirits in these locations have different personalities and different stories to tell. Some are more communicative than others, some prefer privacy, and some seem eager to interact with the living. But in every case, the key to success has been approaching them with respect, honesty, and genuine interest in their experiences rather than trying to exploit them for entertainment value. Robert McKenzie taught me an expensive lesson about the importance of due diligence and professional skepticism. But Edmund, Margaret, and William Blackwood taught me something far more valuable about the power of authentic human connection, even across the boundaries of life and death. That lesson has made all the difference.